you guys for coming this afternoon. I am pleased to present Lizzie Anderson. She designed this project based off of a term paper for my 20th Century Europe class last fall. A paper that actually won the department's highest award for an essay, and so she has since developed this project into a full-blown presentation for today. So I'm very pleased to welcome Lizzie Anderson to the stage.
Thank you. Well, in true history fashion, I'm going to take us back to a typical night at the Cabaret Voltaire. There we go. So it's June 23rd, 1916, in Zurich, Switzerland. Inside of a dark renovated bar, the students gather and have brought their long pipes with them. They're drinking beer, their feet are on the tables, and they're shouting. Not too different from our college students of today. Hugo Ball stands on stage in the dark, and he begins to mutter, Gaji Berry Bimba, Galandri Lali Loni Kadori, Gajamba Binberry Glasala. As the lights illuminate the stage, the students begin to see what Ball is wearing. If this was in color, you could see that he has blue cardboard cylinders around his legs. He's wearing a gold and scarlet collar and a blue and white striped witch doctor's hat. He begins to place greater emphasis on the syllables of his poem, which then turns into an incantation. The poem swells and suddenly stops. The lights go out. And this was Ball's final performance at the Cabaret Voltaire, which had become a sensation in the few months of its existence. What I just described to you is a performance art known as Dadaism. I argue that it's the first organized form of protest art. It was fueled by the lower classes, also known as the proletariat. This is different from previously in history, where art was mainly a system of patronage and commission. So if you had a lot of money and you wanted to show you had a lot of money, you would get an artist to make a painting of you, and then you'd put that painting up in your living room to show everyone what rich person you were. But Dadaism was actually in opposition to these upper classes, the bourgeoisie. I argue that it's the first revolt. Also, Dadaism lacks a concrete definition. You can put words to it, but they're so ambiguous and there's so many different words to use that it's difficult to pinpoint precisely. But this allowed artists to create without boundaries, and it's a reason for its widespread popularity. Wow, this thing hates me. Dadaism was mainly a response to World War I. Those who experienced it watched the destruction of the continent and severe population loss. They also witnessed the failings of democracy and capitalism, ideologies mainly set forward by the bourgeoisie. So many blamed the bourgeoisie for this war and for the mutilation of millions. They also began to think that humans were stunted or deformed by society because of this war. So they began to experiment with different ideologies: fascism, anarchism, socialism, communism. And Dadaism's main purpose was to actually combat these ills of society, of capitalism, of democracy, and to repurify the human spirit and find beauty in humanity, again, without the stresses of society. So the two main founders of the Cabaret Voltaire were Hugo Ball and Emmy Hennings. Hugo Ball studied Expressionist theater at the University of Munich in Berlin, at which he was actually considered a monumental failure. At the outbreak of World War I in November 1914, Ball was unable to join the army due to his weak heart. Instead, he traveled to the war front, of which he described was ecstatic sickness. So disgusted, he fled to Zurich with his partner, Emmy Hennings. Emmy Hennings, to say the least, is a fireball. She was a wandering actress for 6 years before she met Ball, and left her first husband at the age of 20. There was actually a notice in the papers warning her future employers about her unscrupulous behavior because she broke so many theater contracts in her time. But despite her inconsistencies, she was electric on stage, which made her always in demand. As described by Ravian Sarlai in the periodical Die Action, published on June 5, 1912, he wrote, Who can prevent this girl that possesses hysteria, that incendiary quality, the brain-tearing intensity of the literati from swelling to an avalanche? So, if you can't tell, she pretty much blew everyone's mind. Ball met Hennings when he offered her the lead role in Life of Man, as directed by Ball in 1915. And she was a stabilizer for Ball when his mental health would fail. Other members of the Cabaret include Hans Arp, Tristan Tzara, Richard Welsenbeck, and Marcel Jonco, who I will discuss in a little bit here. But I'm sure we're all still wondering, what is Dadaism? Because it's still probably a little vague, and I'm going to try and clear that up. I'm going to try. It can be described as anti-art, anti-history, anti-permanence, pro-spontaneity. It can be described to have a childlike innocence. It can be irrational. It is ambiguous. Dadaism is a submission to impulse. Dadaism rejected all existing institutions. It was primitive. It was absurd. Dadaism was anarchy. And it was freedom. But as you can see, these words are ambiguous and they don't precisely pinpoint a concrete definition. So instead, I'm going to use the words of the founders themselves. Tristan Tzara, a Romanian romantic writer, in his Dada Manifesto writes that Dadaism is an art for babies. It is an encompassment of life. Tzara writes, the roar of contorted pains, the interweaving of contraries and of all contradictions, freaks, and irrelevancies, life. Richard Welsenbeck, who was Ball's protege, wrote, the Dadaist loves life because he can throw it away every day. To him, death is a Dadaist affair. So already there's this discrepancy between Tzara and Welsenbeck. Tzara says that Dadaism is a celebration of life, and yet Welsenbeck says that death is a Dadaist affair. So, I mean, although they deal with the same themes of life and death, they have very different perceptions of what it means, which kind of relates back to that Dadaism is an experience of the individual. It relates and it resounds with each of us at a different level, and we can all have different understandings of Dadaism. Hans Arp, who explored the revolutionary implications of art, writes that we were all Dada before Dada came into existence, once again dealing with these themes of life, death, existence, etc. Emmy Hennings, in her poem Prison, writes that Dadaism is the freedom that no one can take away from us, to go into the unknown land, which is particularly fitting for her, I think, because she dealt with a constant search for freedom her whole entire life. Hugo Ball writes that life asserts itself in contradictions, and this kind of qualifies the previous discrepancies between Tzara and Welsenbeck, because once again it deals with life, but life is so different for everyone and it always has contradictions and complexities. Ball also writes that perhaps the art which we are seeking is the key to every former art, a Solomonic key that will open all mysteries. And this kind of makes Dadaism more of a way of life rather than simply an art form. Even contemporary authors have grappled with this definition. Kenneth Skuth-Smith writes that Dada cannot be defined, it reveals itself. Alan C. Greensberg writes, in its indefinability, it would be comparable to life. Greensberg also notes that performance art is the ideal vehicle for Dadaism. The stage represents a no place, the performance only exists in the present, and when it's over, there's nothing left of the art form. So, as we all kind of continue to process Dadaism, I'm going to move on to another conundrum, which is the usage of the word Dada. The members of the Cabaret Voltaire were the first to use Dada to describe this performance art. In French, Dada means a rocking horse. In Italian, Dada is a pair of dice. And in German, it denotes naivety. Everyone at the Cabaret claimed discovery of this word, and isn't that just typical pioneers? For example, Welsenbeck writes that he and Ball found the word while looking through a French-German dictionary for a name for Madame Leroy, the chanteuse of the Cabaret. Welsenbeck also notes the hypnotic quality of the word, as if it is capable of sending the artist into a separate level of consciousness, which is one of the purposes of Dadaism, to kind of shed off the limitations of society and reach a new sphere. Tzara, in his Charisma writes, "The Negroes of the Kru race call the tail of the sacred cow Dada." This doesn't really relate to any other definitions I found, and the only interpretation that I can think of is that the Dadaists attempted to return to kind of a more primitive style of life, where society doesn't control every aspect, much like African tribes. But throughout all these definitions, there are prevailing themes of childhood and innocence. Simply the infantile repetition of the sound da twice, it's a word that any of us could have said in the first stages of life. And it represents Dadaism's desire to return to an innocence that we're born with and that not necessarily continues through our life. The Dadaists were the first to use simultaneous poetry in the realm of performance art. This poem, Le Admiral cherche una nation à louer, was performed on March 30th, 1916 by Welsenbeck, Zara, and Janko. The three men stood on stage and recited different poems all at the same time, which created a conflict of images and a collision of thought and word. Ball described the performance to be an experience beyond canvas and paper into three-dimensional space and time. Welsenbeck thought of it as the celebration of life and the speech of angels. Afterwards, Ball set forward 3 goals of a language project. The first, language is not the only means of expression. So in other words, we can express ourselves through sound, body language, facial expression, and these are all natural traits that we have rather than language, which is placed upon us by society. Man, not like natural man, hundreds of millions of years ago, did not have language. So this is, again, an attempt to reject the existing institution of society and find other ways of expression. And 2, when communication ceases, loneliness occurs and people sink back into themselves. Again, this returns to the piece of individualism of Dadaism, that it's an experience of the individual and that we should all seek to reflect on ourselves and look inward during a performance of Dadaism. And 3, to spit out words, the dreary, lame, empty language of men in society, to reach an incomprehensible sphere, which is, like Welsenbeck said, of the hypnotic quality of the word Dada, again, to shed off the consciousness that we use in society and maybe perhaps find a different one that is more purified. So, through these language projects, the Dadaists discovered linguistic freedom through experimentation. For example, they created Brutism, which is a noise music and uses natural sound to portray emotion. Ball was the first to use this completely in a poem titled Laut Get. It's a pure phonetic poem with no known language involved. Ball writes, "The poem carries the message that mankind is swallowed up in a mechanic process. It represents the battle of the human voice against a world whose rhythms and whose din are inescapable." All right, and third, the Cabaret Voltaire used these masks and did an interpretive dance with them. As you can see, they're reminiscent of Japanese and Greek theater, but they also have hints of modernism, such as abstractism and cubism. They were described by Ball to be transformative to the wearer and demanded them to start up a tragico-absurd dance. These dances were largely the vehicle for the display of the mask, evidencing no development and incapable of being sustained. These dances expressed the sentiments of post-war society, the angst, the trepidation, the trauma that everyone had underwent during World War I, and they were a way to express that without language, again. And again, they were an attempt to unlock hidden thoughts, the ultimate purpose of Dadaism. However, the cabaret was not to last. In April 1916, Ball's mental state began to decline. He writes, "With all of the tension, the daily performances are just exhausting. They are crippling. In the middle of the crowds, I start to tremble all over. Then I simply cannot take everything and flee." So Ball and Hennings leave Zurich and return to Germany. Welsenbeck also begins to feel similarly. He writes, "I too have always been greatly opposed to this art." Welsenbeck complained of insomnia, a nervous stomach, vomiting, and depression. And this is a strange occurrence because the Cabaret was greeted with such enthusiasm by the members that it's almost counterintuitive that they would be so opposed to it. My theory for this occurrence is that Dadaism opened up like this linguistic freedom, artistic freedom, but that freedom is exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. The whole world is at your feet, but you don't really know what to do with it because I don't think any of us feel true freedom. We're either limited by ourselves, by outside forces, by society, and I think we almost like it that way because we know how to act and we know what to do. But with Dadaism, they were kind of in the unknown, which was scary. There was a brief attempt to reignite Dadaism at the Cabaret Dada in March of 1917. However, the contrasting ideologies of Zara and Ball led to its decline amongst pretty significant financial debt. However, although the lifetime of the Cabaret Voltaire was short, it had immense ripple effects throughout the world. For example, Johannes Bader in Germany distributed a Dadaist newspaper in February 1919 at the National Assembly at Weimar. So this is a perfect example that Dadaism was so prevalent that its influences made it into the political sphere. This is one of his pieces. In English, the title is "The Author of the Book 14 Letters of Christ in His Home." And this collage style is very Dadaesque. And my personal favorite, all the way across the Atlantic in New York, Man Ray, with his piece Object of Destruction, which is a perfect example of Dadaist diversity. His piece isn't really like any others that you can see. And I mean, I know I care about this because I'm nerdy, I'm a history major, this is what I'm passionate about, but why should everyone else in this room care? Well, not for the cliche reason that history, if we don't study it, it's going to repeat itself. No, that's not it. History is a series of unique little pockets of time that will probably actually never happen again. And that study is so intriguing with the different cultural and societal variables as well as the people. People are so unique that this probably will never occur again because it was the first, so it can't. But specifically for Dadaism, they were the first to use the word Dada to describe their art. They were the first to use simultaneous poetry in the realm of performance art. And they were the first to create this, not revolution, this rebellion, art rebellion against the upper classes for the first time in history. So in that, they're pioneers. And their work is exceptionally beautiful because it explores the unknown. I know a lot of us don't like to do that. I personally don't like it. Whatever I don't understand scares me, and I don't want to know about it. But the Dadaists explore the unknown, and they were extremely successful. I mean, of course it ended quickly, but it takes a lot of courage to be so adventurous. And in that, their boldness is beautiful. Thank you.